Hello, everyone. I'm Jenna Paone. Welcome to Lit Chick on a Mighty Blaze. I'm so thrilled to welcome Nicola Harrison today to talk about her new book, The Showgirl. Hello, Nicola. How are you?
Hi, Jenna. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Oh my gosh, I loved this book so much. It was so much fun to read. It was just one of those novels that you're like, yes, like I love everything about this. I love our heroine, Olive. I love this setting. I love the writing, of course, like every detail, all the beautiful glitz and glamour of it. It was such a joy to read. Congratulations.
Thanks. It was fun to write, so I'm glad that you got that out of it.
Absolutely. I mean, you could see your joy in the writing in the pages. And I can't wait to talk about all facets of the book. Before we do, I just want to give everyone a little intro about you and your previous work, and then we'll get going. And folks, as you join us, feel free to put questions in the chat, and we'll try to get to as many as we can at the end. Nicola Harrison. Born in England, Nicola Harrison moved to California, where she received a BA in literature at UCLA before moving to New York City and earning an MFA in creative writing at Stony Brook. She is a member of the Writers' Room, has short stories published in the Southampton Review and Glimmer Train, and articles in Los Angeles Magazine and Orange Coast Magazine. She was the fashion and style staff writer for Forbes, had a weekly column at Lucky Magazine, and is the founder of a personal style business, Harrison Style. She is the author of Montauk, and her latest historical novel, The Showgirl, is published by St. Martin's Press, and it's out now. Of The Showgirl, Booklist says it's full of surprises and romance. Harrison's novel keeps readers turning the pages. Fans of Elizabeth Gilbert's City of Girls will drink this up. And Pop Sugar says Nicola Harrison brings the exciting world of 1927 New York City to life. And Publishers Weekly says, in The Showgirl, vintage Follies glamour is made lush and evocative and is complemented by meaty explorations of hardships faced by women living in the era. Olive is a rebel worth rooting for, and she keeps readers turning the pages. Nicola, welcome and congratulations.
Thank you.
Oh, this book is so much fun. I'm going to let you tell. I was going to just launch into I'm like so excited about it. I'm like, it's about a young singer. But why don't you give us your spiel? Tell us a little bit about The Showgirl and what inspired you to write it.
Sure. So The Showgirl follows the story of Olive Shine, who's a young woman from the Midwest who is determined to make it onto the stage as a Ziegfeld Follies showgirl. And she basically gives everything up and shows up in New York City and knocks on Florin Ziegfeld's door, who's the big Broadway producer, and basically demands a role in the show. And so we go on this wild ride with her on her ups and downs, her triumphs and hardships. And we travel from the New York's theater district to the West Village with all the bohemians and her artist friends, up to the Adirondacks in upstate New York, where they go for the summer. And we just go on this adventure. But of course, there's a love story involved. And she meets a man, Archie Carmichael, who whisks her off her feet. And he's sort of the first man who ever accepts her for her independent ways and her modern take on life and her passion for success. But she has a devastating secret in her past. And in the end, she has to decide if she's willing to reveal this secret and give up the life she loves for the man she loves.
Yes. Oh, it's so good. Now, what was your inspiration behind this? What was kind of like the entry point into this to know?
It was a roundabout way to get there. So when I first started thinking about writing my second novel, I had no idea I was going to be writing about a showgirl. Mm-hmm. And I had actually written an article for a travel magazine about this resort in upstate New York in the Adirondacks called The Point. And it's like, you can stay there now. It's like a hotel, and it costs something like $2,000 a night to stay. And, no big deal. And so as I was researching this place, you go hiking and boating during the day, and then at night they throw these cocktail parties where you have to dress up in tuxedos and cocktail dresses, because they tried to do it as it was back in the day. And I found out that this place was originally owned by William Avery Rockefeller II as his family compound. Yep. And then I found out that there were all these other places like that up there called these great camps. And I thought, I'm going to set a novel up at one of these great camps, because I like the idea of the rustic retreat up against this luxury and everything. So I'd never been. So I went up to the Adirondacks, and I stayed at one of these camps, one called White Pine Camps. White Pines Camp. And a local historian was giving me a tour and of the cabins and the great room and the bowling alley and all these great things. And he was talking about the architecture. And then he just casually mentioned that the original owner of this camp, his wife, had been a Ziegfeld Folly. And he said, yeah, he's like, she was a real party girl, and she used to invite her theater friends up and throw these huge parties. And he said, but she insisted that no one should walk more than 500 feet without a drink in their hand. So she'd set up bar carts along the hiking trails with bartenders. And I was like, she sounds like a lot of fun. And I just thought, I had found my way into the story. So it went in a totally different direction.
That's so cool. I love that. That's like my kind of hiking. Like that's that's like the kind of outdoorsy that I am. Like that's my like, it's, that quote of like, I'm outdoorsy and that I like to drink outside. Like I do love to hike, but like better to do it with a cocktail in your hand.
Right. It was the original glamping, I think.
Yeah, of course. Oh, that's so fun. What a fun, that must have been a great conversation of talking to him and hearing all of this. And I love hearing how you kind of went into like a roundabout way. So it seems like you were really, really inspired by setting and, thinking an era. Obviously, you're a historical fiction writer, and Montauk, your first book, is similar in that the setting is really, this book cannot happen really any other time than in which it happens. Of course, it's a story that stretches through the ages, and you could tell it in a different way with like, a Vegas showgirl or something, but it's so of the era. Is that kind of how you approach new projects? Do you sort of think of like, I'd like to delve into this world, like the way that you did, like, hey, I'd like to write a thing about this Adirondack camp, and what era would make the most sense, and like what you're most interested in?
Yeah, it seems to be for me that I come to a story with a place in mind. So with Montauk, which is my first book, Montauk, I had spent a lot of time there, and I used to have a house out there. So I was sort of nostalgic for the idea of how Montauk used to be back in the day when it was just a little fishing village and it first got developed. And so it was the idea of Montauk. I just wanted to capture that. And then the story grew from there. And yeah, with the showgirl, same thing. It was the idea of a place. Mm-hmm. The Adirondacks does, even though a lot of it takes place in New York City in the theater district and everything, and on the stage. Some of it does take place in the Adirondacks. They go there. That's like family, vacation home.
It's the most. It's the settings. All of in your books, setting and setting and aesthetics are so integral to your books. It's so fun. That's like one of the things. Obviously, you have a history in fashion, a background in fashion. Clearly, you have excellent style and an excellent aesthetic sense, but that's part of the joy of reading your work, is to experience the world around. We know what the characters are wearing. Like I can picture Olive's gorgeous, gowns, the beaded white, like I can like the gold and the, and the red, and I actually remember very clearly the dresses that he wears throughout the book, and the setting, and there's this beautiful cottage with a tree growing in it in the center up in the Adirondack camp. How do you work in these aesthetics, and do you kind of do you approach things visually? Do you kind of do you make vision boards? Do you have an idea, or do you just kind of build it collectively as you write the scene?
Yeah, so I don't do vision boards, but I don't know. I just do a lot of research. I look at a lot of images. I sort of like way more images, and I do way more research than I would ever actually make it into the book. But I feel like it's like my head has to be like so full of ideas and visions in order to then write it. And I think my background as a fashion writer helps a lot, because I'm very observant now of fashion, to the point where I think I drive my husband a little bit crazy. We're watching a TV show, and it will just get to like the really good part, and he's like sitting on the edge of his seat, and I'll be like, look at that guy's lapels. They're like way too narrow. Like he should definitely hem those pants, and the legs like too wide. And he's like, oh my God, can you please pay attention to something else? But I fixate on these little details, and I notice them. And so it helps write them when I'm
What
writing.
was your research like for this book? Because it's again so well researched, and I always do feel like I learned something about the era. This is the way I like to learn, through reading novels. I'd prefer to read a novel than nonfiction about an era. Like, and in the same way, like I'd prefer to go and visit a place and learn about it. And but so, what was your research like for this book? What kind of?
So I went up to the Adirondacks that one time, and then we went again. I planned our whole family vacation around it the following summer because I wanted to embody it and feel like what would it be like to like spend the summer here, even though we were just there for a week. Yeah. And then I read a ton of books, and all about New York City in the 1920s and Prohibition and the flappers and their motivations for why they were fighting to be so independent. And one book that I read that was particularly instrumental for this book was it was a memoir by a Ziegfeld Follies girl named Doris Eaton Travis. And at age 14, she was the youngest Ziegfeld Folly ever to be cast. And she went on to live to be 106. And for her 100th birthday, she went back to the New Amsterdam Theater where the Ziegfeld Follies were performed. And she performed on the stage at age 100 with leading a line of like 26 chorus girls. so I got all about her and her theatrical family. Her sister was also one of the Ziegfeld Follies. And so you just got all the details about the rehearsals and the costumes and working with Florenz Ziegfeld. So that was really neat.
And Florenz Ziegfeld does, he's an integral part of the book. So there's all of your characters are obviously fictionalized, and so is he. It's a fictionalized version of him. Is it any different how you approach, like he's the one, if I'm not mistaken, he's the one other than possibly an appearance by Gertrude, who's supposed to be Gertrude Stein, right? Yeah. And then you have the Belmonts, who are, supposed to be kind of like one of those rich Newport families. Yeah. But they're sort of, they're very much more fictionalized. Was it your approach writing Ziegfeld any differently? Was there anything that you kind of, kept in mind while you were trying to, render him on the page?
I had more research to go on with him, definitely. But then I tried to just like read it all and absorb it all, and then just think of him as a fictional character. Yeah. Because I just didn't want it to feel like clunky or heavy that it was based on a real person. Yeah. And you decided like in that rather than making it like, the Reginald Follies or something, like it was going to be the Ziegfeld Follies. It was going to be something that people attach to. I know we were talking before the broadcast that not everyone kind of is aware of this sort of slice of history. I actually, my original start was on the stage as a dancer, actor, and singer, and like very much aware of the Follies, because the few shows that I am suited for are shows like Cabaret, and it's all like the Candor and Ebb musicals and things like the Follies, because they're all dance heavy shows, and I was primarily a dancer. So the Follies are like very much a part of my repertoire on stage. Can you tell everyone a little bit about the Follies and what it was, and for those who might not be as aware? Right. I wasn't that aware either. I mean, I'd heard of them, but I didn't know that much until I started doing all this research. So from 1907 to 1930, they were like, the Ziegfeld Follies was like the most spectacular Broadway review. And when you go to see a Broadway show now, you expect to be wowed. You expect it to be like amazing costumes and the talent and the stage design and everything. You sort of know you're going to have a good night out and see a great show. But back then, it wasn't like that. So Florenz Ziegfeld really paved the way for Broadway shows, and he was so over the top. He insisted on the best of the best, and he spent so much money on having like the best fabrics and the best costumes and these incredible like 25-pound headdresses that these women would have to wear, and jewelry and everything. And he spent so much money. In fact, when he died, he was in so much debt from putting on these shows that he was way out of what he could afford. But it just kind of showed people like, you can make a Broadway show this spectacular and this amazing. So but they were really made famous by their showgirls, and he was very, very specific. And he also launched the careers of so many women who were unknowns, and he put them on the stage and put them on a pedestal, and they became the celebrities of the time. What was I going to say next? I don't know, but it was
Warren Ziegfeld. No, he launched the careers of so many women, and I mean, I have to say, like, there is a part of me that, like, if I could go back to any time, it would be like the 1920s, in this time of like this, like in New York, with as somebody who like loves theater and dance, and like, it's interesting how many opportunities, like, this was such an interesting time for women in so many different ways, right? The 1920s is a really unique time period because we're coming out of sort of the buttoned up Victorian era, and it's before the Depression, and we'll talk about that a little bit, because you're on the cusp of the Great Depression, and the Great Depression figures heavily in the end of your book. But it was this sort of like glimpse of what could be.
Yes.
And so like Olive is it's a perfect time to tell stories about liberation with women, which this story very much is. And Olive, your protagonist, is very much, she's a perfect representation of that kind of new modern women. Can you talk a little bit about building Olive, how you developed her, how you decided that she was the right voice to carry this story?
Yeah. So she's definitely like a feisty, ambitious, driven woman, and so she was a lot of fun to write. It was a lot of fun to write that kind of character. And so in 1920, women had just got the right to vote, so they were emboldened by this, and they were like, I want my opinions to be heard. I want to dress the way I want to dress, and dance the way I want to dance, and smoke and drink if I want to. But yeah, like you said, this was butting up against they were trying to break away from their the Victorian ways of their parents and the older generations, who they were wearing like structured outfits, wool, thick, heavy fabrics down to their ankles, and then all of a sudden these women are like, forget the corsets, I'm going to go braless and wear this like shift dress that's showing off not my ankles but my legs. And you think about what a drastic change that is. And fashion now, when you're going from like skinny jeans to like the boyfriend cut, you're talking like a quarter of an inch difference. It's like, oh wow, whole new style. The style then changed so dramatically. So it must have been very liberating for these women to be acting and dressing in a whole different way,
to be able to move. I mean, when you think of the dancing and things, like it makes so much sense, because you're coming out of corsets and these heavy petticoats and long ankle length things, and then all of a sudden to like have a scrap of fabric on that is not anything. It is really interesting. I love fashion. I'm a big fashion history person too, and I just love, like, I could tell, like, you light up when you kind of talk about that. It's so cool. Can you tell us a little bit about the fashion of the time? I mean, we all have a sense of like what 1920s is, but like, tell us a little bit about what you learned.
Well, the dresses were shorter, and they were cutting their hair short and wearing a lot more makeup. And it was more of this like sort of boyish, athletic, straight up and down. They're like, they wanted things that they could move in, that they could dance in and feel free in. So, but there was the flappers, and the flappers very much embodied the feeling of the 20s. And so, yeah, it was a lot of fun.
What I love too about Olive is that typically in books like this, or stories like this in general, the heroine is really very much an ingenue, and Olive is not an ingenue. Olive is like that woman of the time, and she's like the Reno Sweeney, to use like an anything goes kind of like reference. Like, she is that grand dame in the works. Like, she's problematic. At times she makes a lot of questionable decisions, and there's a wholesomeness to her too. In she like is very motivated by this desire to to succeed, which I think is really understandable by all women. And yet she's messy, and in a lot of ways she's really a very contemporary character. And obviously when you write historical fiction, you're writing historical fiction for a contemporary audience. Can you talk a little bit about that, about how you balance the need for historical accuracy with the need to tell a good story for a modern reader?
Yeah, so I think that's what I love about historical fiction the most, is because I love creating that whole world and doing the research, and then painting the picture of, you know, the 20s and the music and the era and everything. But then I find that with these characters, these strong female characters, it's like they still have the same needs and wants and desires that like we have today. You know, they want to be to love and be loved. They want to feel successful at something. You know, not necessarily that they had these big careers back then, but like they wanted to feel good about what they were doing. And so it's like, yeah, I said it in a different time and place, but they have these universal desires. But yeah, I mean, definitely Olive is a flawed character. And I think, you know, she does make a lot of questionable choices along the way. And sometimes you're kind of cringing, like, don't do that. Why would you do that? But I think anyone who is paving the way and, you know, leading the way, it hasn't been done before, they're going to make mistakes, and they're going to, you know, go off on the wrong path before they come back. So that's what I want. I didn't want to write her as this perfect character who's just like independent and you know, she should have everything come easy to her. It's like, no, she's going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
And that's human nature.
Without giving any spoilers, I mean, the main dilemma that Olive faces is something that I think is really in the spotlight right now, especially in light of the pandemic and the situation we're in, where women are once again, you know, we feel like we've come so far and we're like, oh, wait, we have not come very far at all. And you realize just how much society leans on women to sort of diminish themselves and give up parts of themselves in order to kind of serve the greater whole. And Olive is really faced with this, you know, this dilemma of how to balance her professional aspirations, her desire to have this career and her independence with her, you know, her longing for meaningful relationships on both a romantic level, a friendship level, and a familial level, and the idea of motherhood. And the motherhood thing is I'm a new mom, and it's a very nuanced take of how difficult and what a struggle it can be, especially if you're an artist, a creative woman, of how to move forward in your life and sort of have it all. Like, can you have the career and a family? What drew you to these topics, and what was it like? I understand you wrote this book while you know, becoming a mom to your second child. What was it like to write this book? Was that influenced by your personal circumstances? You know, I know you weren't trying to be a showgirl, and
it was. You're absolutely right. So yeah, I mean, definitely one of the things I wanted to explore in this book was the question that you just asked. I'm glad that you got that from it. Was like, can you have it all? Yeah. And what does that mean then versus now? You know, and you know, it's definitely one of those contemporary issues that we're facing now. Like, can you have a successful career and be a good mom and be in a good relationship and be a good wife? And you know, it's certainly something that I struggle with on a daily basis, and I think so many women struggle with. And Olive is struggling with it then. And you know, it's also interesting that people who are creative people and they have these passions, even if they're not creative, it's just if you're passionate about something, you feel alive when you're able to do it, and you feel kind of suffocated when you can't. And I remember when the pandemic hit and we were in like lockdown, and I had a 1-year-old at the time and a 10-year-old, and the 1-year-old was like getting into everything. How old is your child?
She's 9.5 months, so she's getting, she's like starting to walk, and she's she's like, yeah, we're in for it.
We get about 2 months.
Yeah.
Because he was at the age where he had just started to walk, and he was like running and climbing on everything and trying to like jump off things. I couldn't take my eyes off him for a second. And then I had my then 10-year-old who was trying to do remote school. And I was like, oh my God, like I'm never going to be able to write again. You know, probably a little melodramatic, but that's how it felt at the time. And totally. I was like so worried because I had just got onto this career path and I was doing well. And I'm like, I'm never going to be able to do it. And, and then finally my husband and I figured out like a 2-hour shift thing where he was doing 2 hours and I was doing 2 hours and kind of worked out. But then he started going back to work, and So it was just, you're right. It falls on the woman, whether, you want it to or not. And so, yeah, I mean, that was something that I was looking at in this book as well.
It's a really timely thing. I mean, for me, like I've had like a mental breakdown all year of being like, am I ever going to have like a second to do this? A moment, like, am I going to have the brain power to write anymore? Am I going to have, the time and the space? And it is really interesting because the pandemic has like made all of these issues so much tighter. Like before, it wasn't as much of a discussion because there were more options for childcare and things like that. But, also that's coming from, a place of privilege of like having those options and being able to make, like, it is an interesting thing. And I do think that, reading this book was like one of the first hopeful, like, I feel like I've been just reading these all these articles that are like, nope, it can't, like, you're not going to do it. You're not going to do it. It's never going to happen. And your book found this lovely, way of kind of helping Olive find a way to move forward, and get out of her way. And I really do think it's very inspiring and very encouraging. And it helped me. I mean, this to me is like the kind of the biggest compliment I can give is like, you kind of opened my mind to a different sort of way of looking at it. And I'm like, wow, like this is really cool. You talk about sort of the evolution of how we think about our careers too, and how Olive thinks about her career and how she thinks about her identity, within the context of all that, it's all these parts coming into a whole. It was really great. And I'm interested, was that purposeful? What do you kind of hope that readers will take away from the Showgirl?
I think I want them to take away can you hear that?
Yeah.
A little back and forth. Okay. Sorry. I want them to take away this first of all, I want them to have a lot of fun when they're reading it. And I want them to get immersed in this whole story and this whole world, because that was a lot of fun for me. Yeah. But I just also want them to have this sense of like, female ambition and drive, and how, you need it. We need it. We need it in our lives. And you feel, alive when you're able to pursue the things that are important to you, and when you're able to live the life that you feel that you're meant to live.
I love it. Oh, it's so fun. Let's go back to some of the fun aspects of the book. So Olive and Archie. Archie is our romantic lead. He's our romantic interest. And he's such a great guy. And their their relationship, it's so fun. And so, it's kind of a sweep you off your feet sort of thing. It's kind of like what you imagine of like, oh, like, hello. He like brings Olive into this world of privilege and wealth, and, wants to shower her with affection and gifts and beautiful things. And they also have, like, their relationship seems really fun and believable and healthy, but it also has a lot of the conflict that is necessary for a good story. I mean, the story wouldn't be as interesting if we know whether they end up together or not. And it has to be believable that, they, not just that it might not work, but that if it does work out, we want to be happy about that. And we don't want to feel like Olive has like sacrificed her independence. How do you balance creating a romantic couple like Olive and Archie that we want to root for, but that have legitimate conflict and tension? How do you do that as a writer?
Yeah. So the other thing that was fun to write about their relationship was he is a wealthy man, and he does bring her into this whole world, but he also can hang, downtown, and he's like got this whole art interest. So he hangs out with the artists, and that's kind of why they connect, because they can kind of hang out in various different places and fit right in. And so that's what I liked about their relationship. But yeah, and he seems like he's going to be very open, and he knows who she is when he meets her. He knows that she's a performer, and that's what he loves about her. But then, he sort of like can't shed his traditional ways, and sort of like his mother looking over his shoulder and sort of giving these traditional senses of, well, this is what a woman should be doing, and this is what a man should be doing. And, and I think I wanted to make it believable that back then he may want to be independent, and he may want to encourage her independence. But that's very hard for him as well.
Yes, of course. I mean, he's a product of the time as well as everyone did. And there's always this sort of idea of like, okay, well, after you're done, you're gonna, now that you've gotten this out of your system, like now you can kind of come along and be the nice wife and and all of those things. And that's I think again a timely issue and sort of a thing that we keep returning to time and time again, even though we're 100 years later. Was it poignant for you to be writing this in 2020 and be writing this about the 1920s, like a century later? Do you think there's a reason that the 20s spoke to you at this particular time?
Maybe, but I didn't know it at the time. When I was writing this, I didn't know. But certainly now, as the book's coming out, I've heard economists make parallels between the 1920s and the 2020s, because in the 1920s, World War I was just behind them. They just had the flu epidemic of 1918, which I think killed like 50 million people worldwide. So they had when they were finally able to put all that sort of doom and gloom behind them, they were in this very celebratory mood. And, they wanted to go out and socialize and see their friends and see music and go out dancing. And then you think about now, and it's like, well, people kind of are they're itching to do the same thing. People are wanting to plan vacations and go to Broadway shows again. And so, there definitely seems to be some parallels between the 20s.
I am so here for the 1920s revival. I'm here for the Roaring 20s 2.0 when we finally get past this, if we ever do. So the Showgirl is written in first person, and Montauk, if I'm not mistaken, is also in first person. Can you talk about why that's the point of view that you choose?
Well, I mean, the real reason is it's probably the easiest way for me to delve in and really get into character and imagine that I'm there. And that's probably because it is historical, and so it's a different world from what I'm used to. So if I write it in first person, I can really just feel like I'm in the 20s.
Yeah, I love it. I love that. And now I'm forgetting my thought process of the next question, which is terrible. But in writing this, I know where I was going to go. How different, I always like hearing this, how different is the finished product of the Showgirl from your original idea, your original conception? How many like rewrites did you go through? How different is the overall concept? And did you kind of hit any obstacles and roadblocks along the way? And if so, how did you kind of push through them and move past them?
It's so funny. I feel like writing a book is, how when you give birth and there's that hormone that you get that makes you forget it, so that you'll do it again.
Because it was so terrible that you need to forget it.
You write a book. Because I do know that when I was writing this, I struggled, and but now I can't remember what those struggles were. And my husband reminds me. He's like, you had a hard time, but you got through it. And when I'm writing my book now and I was facing struggles, he's like, you can do this. Remember, the same thing happened last time. So I'm trying to remember. It wasn't that different from the beginning to the end. I generally seem to know when I'm writing a novel. I know where it's going to start, where it's going to end, and pretty much what's going to happen along the way. And with both novels now, that they've pretty much stayed true. But as I've written it, definitely there have been paths that I didn't know I was going to go down, or there are characters that come in that I had no idea were going to come in, which I think is so funny. And I think if I had heard another writer tell me that a few years ago, I wouldn't have believed it because it sounds cheesy, but it actually happens. Like, you just get into it and suddenly you're writing a scene and a minor person comes in that you think is just going to come in and go out, and then they end up having a bigger presence. So those sorts of things are nice surprises along the way. But yeah, the beginning and the end ended up pretty much where I thought they would be.
That's cool. That's cool. Are you a pantser or a plotter? Do you outline? Do you just write scenes? Do you kind of do your research and then just dive in?
I'm sort of right in the middle of a pantser and a plotter. First of all, I do all the research and research for about a month or 2 months. And I just read as much as I can and take notes and find videos and go to the library and all that kind of stuff, and just try to absorb as much as I can. And then I try to put all of those books and articles away. And it's usually you kind of know, you get to the point where you're itching to start writing. And then I start writing scene by scene, and I write like maybe a page summary of what I think the story is going to be.
Yeah.
But I don't map out like every single chapter and every single scene.
Yeah. That's cool. I love hearing about process. Going back to your research for just a second, Anissa asked, did you uncover any nuggets during your research that gave you an idea for a future book? Or I'll just say in that, did you uncover any sort of like really cool things that that maybe made it into the book or didn't, that you were like, oh, this is really, really fun?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know about for a future book with my research from this, but some things that I found out that were really cool would, like I had no idea that the Broadway producer Florian Ziegfeld was such a perfectionist. I mean, he was so specific about what he wanted in his women for showgirls. They had to be a certain height, and he just could describe exactly the look that he wanted. And he actually had this clear plastic mask that he would like hold up to women's faces to see if they were symmetrical enough to be a showgirl. Like, I don't know if I would make it. Like,
I don't think I would.
It's so funny. And so he was just such a perfectionist. I thought that was really interesting. I had no idea about that.
That, like, I mean, gosh, that seems so like typical of, you know, when you think of like Fosse and you think of George Balanchine, and like there's as a dancer, like there are many men in the history of dance that like there's a type of woman like that is like the Ziegfeld girl, and like this is the Fosse girl, and this is the Balanchine girl, and it's like a very like they have this type that they go for. That's really interesting. And Sharon asks, how did you decide to do a playlist, which is such a fun thing that we can talk about. I love when authors do this. Can you tell everyone about your playlist?
So I would just like listen. I would look up music and listen to it while I was writing, just to sort of get me in the mood. And so then I was like, I should just put this together as a playlist. And it was just really fun. I mean, some of it is originally music from the 1920s, and then some of it is like a modern take on it.
Cool.
And so it was just really fun. I'm glad that you pointed that out, because I didn't know if anyone actually listened to it.
And it's on Spotify, right?
Yeah, it's on Spotify,
Yep. So you can just go to Spotify and type in
The Showgirl, or you can type in Nicola Harrison. I think it will probably come up.
Awesome. Oh, good. We're linking it to it too.
Okay. Thank you on my website too.
Yeah, and I want to point out and say thank you to our producer Julie, who always is on the behind the scenes, running the social conversation and doing her own research, and also putting together everything to make sure that this goes smoothly for us. So thank you, Julie Gerstenblatt. You are awesome. We love you, and thank you for linking. She's linking to the playlist, and she's linking to a lot of other cool things. A few more questions. So Olive Olive experiences something of a career evolution throughout the book, and you have had a cool career evolution as well. Writing novels is sort of a bit of a second act, even though all of it totally makes sense. Like with your background, you were a journalist. Clearly, you went to school for writing as well. So like this was always brewing in your mind. But what made you decide to finally transition into writing novels? What was that transition like for you?
Yeah. So like you said, I went to UCLA for my undergrad, and I studied English and creative writing. I'm also really bad at math, so it was like I had to go that career.
Yeah, I can't add. It's fine.
No, but I always enjoyed it. I always liked that. So, and then after that, I moved to New York and got into fashion journalism, and I was the style writer at Forbes, working full time. But then when I was pregnant and I had my son, who's now 11. I wanted to be, have more time, have more flexibility. So I started writing freelance, and that's when I went back to school to get my MFA in creative writing, mostly because on the side I was always taking a creative writing class, and I'm like, I might as well just go back to school and have like a degree of some sort. So I did that. And then a few years later, when he was 4, I went through a divorce. And so all of a sudden I was like by myself with my son, and I put him to bed at 7, and I suddenly, for the first time in a long time, had all this time to myself in the evenings at home. And so that's when I started tapping away on Montauk, my first novel. And I'm in a writing workshop as well. And I've been in this writing workshop for like 10 years, where we meet every Thursday and we just like show up with a few pages and share them with each other. So you're not always writing in a vacuum. And so so then I was writing Montauk. Oh, and at this time, you know, after going through a divorce, I was like, I need to get back to work. So, but I didn't want to go back to a full-time job because my son needed me. So I started a personal styling business.
Yeah.
I help people dress well. Using my fashion journalism background, and that went really well. That was like a great little business that I started, and it was great. But then when Montauk came out, and I had a second book deal, and this is like really my dream job. I mean, like, you know, when Montauk came out, I was just turning 40. And so you're right, it was like my second act. And I was so thrilled to be able to do this and to be able to write a second book. And so then I decided that I was going to write full time. Awesome. And so that's what I'm doing.
I love that. What is your schedule like? Like, what's your daily writing routine? Is there one? I mean, again, you're a mom. Like, how do you? I always say this every week. I'm like, how do you balance? Like, I hate the question of how do you balance it, but like what for you is working, especially under these extreme circumstances? I know you said you and your husband had kind of worked out a little bit of a schedule. Are you somebody who needs, you know, just a couple hours a day to get that? Do you have a daily page goal, or do you just sort of, you know, have the goal of like sitting down and being a writer that day? What to you is like your daily way of keeping the, you know, pushing the project forward?
Well, it's all been so up in the air, and there've been so many changes going on. And so what's really working for me right now is that we live now close to my parents. So they come up and babysit 2 days a week, which is amazing. And then I have a little help, and then my in-laws come 1 day a week, and then I have a little help. So it's, you know, I'm just sort of like piecing it all together right now until school starts. So once school starts, my little one's going to go into preschool, my big kid's going to go into middle school, and then I'm going to have like a chunk of time to write. And that's what I feel that I need, is really sort of like 9 to 2 or 9 to 3 in order to be able to sit down, because, you know, sometimes you sit down to write and it doesn't come right away.
Yeah.
Or you don't know what you're writing, or you try to write a scene and it's like, that's actually not the scene I'm in the mood to write right now. Sometimes it takes a good like hour or two to really get into it. And then you're going and you need more time. So that's really, I'm looking forward to school starting.
You and I have a similar process of like, and then after that, like, you're not really productive after that, like 3 or 4 hour mark. And like it tapers off, you know, like
for like 8 hours straight. Even if I had 8 hours straight, I wouldn't be able to just write something.
Me neither. I would love to know what you're working on now, because I'm sure, like, we hope it's working for you, because we're excited for the next book. Can you tell us a little bit about the next project?
Yeah, sure. So in the last year, I found out that my husband, I also, while I was writing the Showgirl, I remarried and had a baby. So just to complete that full story.
That's the big, yes. There's a lot of things.
Yeah, a lot of things. You know, keep it interesting. So in the last year, I found out that my husband's grandmother was a Rosie the Riveter, and she worked in an airplane factory during World War II here in Southern California.
Cool.
And so I was really interested in it. So I spoke to my mother-in-law, and she told me, you know, some information about it, and I started doing more research. And I just thought it was really interesting at that time that these women stepped up and took on these men's roles, you know, building airplanes and tanks and bombs, and then the war ended and the men came back and took their jobs back, and then they were like, all right, ladies, go back to being a housewife. And it was, for a lot of these women, it was the first time they'd worked outside of the home, and it was the first time they had this taste of doing these, you know, jobs and feeling that sense of empowerment. I like the feeling, you know, female empowerment in my books.
Yes, clearly.
So that sort of was the spark for this next book. But actually, it starts off with a woman named Hazel Francis. So the war's over. She's worked in the airplane factory, but she's out of a job, and she doesn't really have much of a home to go back to. So she has to figure out what she's going to do next. And the real story takes place. She ends up down in Laguna Beach, which is an artists' community. Yeah. And she ends up working for a very eccentric, famous artist with a bit of a crazy past, and she gets really involved in the art world, a little too deep. She gets a little too involved for her liking, and so it's a lot of fun to write. I'm enjoying it.
Oh, I can't wait. Another fabulous book in store for you. Couple, just like little easy, fun questions for the end. What's the best writing advice you've ever been given? And what's the worst writing advice you've ever been given? Or is there something, and feel free to like, just say if there's something that, has always stuck with you, or like something you've learned along the way of like, oh, that doesn't work for me. Like,
Right.
Like,
Well, probably the best writing advice was, so at UCLA, when I studied creative writing, I took classes with Carolyn C., who's actually the mother of Lisa C., the historical author.
Yep.
And she was such a wonderful like mentor to me. And I remember her telling all of us in our little creative writing class, like, don't try to graduate from college and then go out and write your novel. Like, you don't have anything to say yet. I remember thinking, yeah, I do. I've got loads to say, but it's so true. Like I think that you got to live a little bit and have some jobs and have a little bit of life experience under your belt. Until I don't know, maybe that's not the case for everyone. Some people can probably write an amazing novel at age 22, but I needed to be in my late 30s to make that happen. So that worked for me. I don't know what my worst writing advice is. I can tell you some of my writing advice.
Yes, please do. We love writing advice. Give us all the writing advice.
Well, I think probably the thing that has helped me keep writing on a consistent basis is being in this writing group that I'm in. With this same group of people. I mean, a few people have come, but it's really the same core group of people. There's like 6 of us. And we meet every Thursday now on Zoom, and we just bring in some pages and share them. And it just, first of all, it gives you a deadline. So that like every week you have to show up with something. And it holds you accountable. And you're not writing in this vacuum. You're not writing. I think it's a little scary to write an entire book without anyone giving you any feedback along the way. I don't send sections out for anyone to read until I'm done with the whole thing. But I like having that little touchstone along the way.
Anyone we would recognize that's in the workshop with you?
There's the author, Jennifer Bell. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she's got a bunch of books out. And then there's others who are like on the way to getting agents and that kind of thing.
How did you find this group? Did it happen organically? Did you like meet somebody? Did you you said did you guys kind of build it yourselves, or did you, because we at the Blaze, we actually, a lot of us are in a writing group with one of our founders, Jenna Paone, that like, it's been like, such a lifeline for all of us as well, that like, it's this amazing community that we have it was already formed when I joined it. But when I lived in New York, I used to go to a place called the Writer's Room, which is like a big loft space for writers, and it's so cool. It's like all desks, and it's totally silent, and you have to be a writer of some sort to work there. And it's just like a really great feeling when you go in and write, because there's other people working on their creative projects, and so it's like you feel like, oh, I'm going to get the work done today. So it was through joining that and working there that I met these other people. That's awesome. There's nothing like a great community of creative people around you. And again, that's one of the great things about the Showgirl is like, one of the fun things too is watching all of like, it's like women supporting women within this, creative people supporting creative people. It's just such a great, fun book. Cannot recommend it enough. Everyone run out and buy it. Nicola, do you have an independent bookstore you want to give a shout out to? Somewhere maybe that has some signed copies?
So Pages, a bookstore in Manhattan Beach, is my new local bookstore, and they're fabulous. That's where we did our first in-person launch event on Tuesday. Awesome. They have signed copies there. I'm also going to be going on a Southern book tour. I'm leaving on Saturday. I'm going to the various places, and they're all listed on my website. Florida, Tampa, Greenville, North Carolina, Charleston. So it's going to be fun.
Oh, so fun. That's going to be great. I think some people that we're watching today are going to come to some of your events there. Yeah. So say hello. Say you said you saw Nicola on the Blaze. Nicola, thank you so much for joining us today. This was so fun. Congratulations on the Showgirl. Everyone, please follow Nicola on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, and say hello and tell her how much you love the book. Any last words about the Showgirl before we let folks
I hope you have as much fun reading it as I did writing it. It was great fun to write. And Jenna, thank you so much. This was such a fun conversation. I loved it.
Thank you. I loved it too. One last question before you go.
Mm-hmm.
If you were going to spend a night out on the town in the 1920s with Olive, what are you guys going to do?
Well, we would probably go to Chumley's, and then we would definitely go dancing.
And what are you wearing?
Short little sequin dress with some tassels, a headdress, some feathers, and some medium heel shoes so I can get my dancing on.
I love it. Fantastic. Nicola, thank you so much. Congratulations again on the Showgirl. Thank you all for joining us on Lit Chick on a Mighty Blaze. Thank you, Julie Gerstenblatt, for producing this interview. And thank you all for joining us. And we'll see you next week with Gervais Haggerty is next week. Thank you, guys. Have a great week.